This is the story of three cinemas in Seaford: the Ritz, Empire, and the Electric Theatre. But first, a brief history from the early 1900s. Thomas Edison demonstrated his phonograph on the 29th of November 1877, the conclusion that it is already possible, by ingenious optical contrivances, to throw stereoscopic photographs of people onto screens, in full view of an audience. Moving pictures to life, luminous, bright and dark and definite. The first moving pictures were shown at penny arcades, as a collection of picture cards in continuous succession, lasting 15 minutes to 1 hour, accompanied by a piano. It brought people together to watch the latest black and white comedy productions. The silent movie created many stars: Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, Harold Lloyd, Laurel and Hardy, and many more. Before cinema arrived in the late 1800s, Seaford was a small, quiet fishing town. Surrounded by farmland, it prospered as a cinque port. Seaford became a healthy resort and thriving tourist destination. Tom Burton's memories of his first film experience were on a field opposite French's Garage on Stane Road. We all stood on the grass to watch black and white moving pictures, and it was free. We called the moving pictures the flicks. I also worked as a cinema attendant at the Empire, got paid £5 a week.
There were 6 pubs in the town, which was a large number for a population of over 1,000 people. So the local entertainment would be sing-alongs in the pub, but there wasn't a lot of organised entertainment. What was interesting was cinema first arrived on the south coast in Eastbourne in 1906 and in Brighton in 1907. That was about the time that an entrepreneur called Thomas Funnell arrived on the scene. This building is the birthplace of Seaford Cinema. Thomas Funnell in 1908 built it, hoping it would be part of the gasworks. He thought it was a good idea that the local residents of Seaford and the tourists should benefit from Seaford's own cinema. He found a site in Brooklyn Road. It was right next door to the gasworks. It wasn't the most salubrious of sites. But nevertheless, his vision would be multi-purpose. The building that he put up in 1908 served first of all as a roller skating rink, and as time went by, he got more ambitious and showed films there.
The only thing I know is through my aunts and my mother, they used to go there and they sat on benches, and there was a lady that played the piano, and apparently she was awfully friendly with the manager. And rumour had it that she was probably more friendly than anybody else in that theatre.
It was always a stopgap because another developer called Charles Bravery saw what was happening and thought, I can put a new cinema right in the heart of the town in Sutton Road. So in 1913, he built a 500-seat cinema called the Empire.
It looked like an old-fashioned music hall with lots of drapes, colours, lighting, you know, it was really quite something. There was an entrance, kiosk for selling sweets and cigarettes and God knows what else. And then inside you had a bit of a slope down to where the screen was.
You would be entertained by black and white silent film. Some of the locals were quite scared of the film because it sort of showed the moving image for the first time for them. Thomas Funnell couldn't compete with that. And so his kick-starting the concept of Seaford's own cinema changed and it became part of the gasworks. And Charles Bravery took over the torch for the film industry in Seaford. Well, the early silent movies had stars of the English music hall, people like Stan Laurel and Charlie Chaplin. Stan Laurel from Lancashire, Charlie Chaplin from Lambeth.
The voice was captured on a waxed cylinder, transmitting sound onto audio devices. This was the age of the talkies.
But then the war broke out. And by late 1915, the Canadians arrived. So these were all a demographic of young men with time on their hands and kept the cinema going really well. The entertainment experience changed in those first years. Just before the Second World War, I have a feeling that the Empire was like the Flea Pit and the Ritz was the brand new show in town.
The last film to be shown was Port of Seven Seas, starring Wallace Beery. It was shown on the 28th of February in 1939. Once it finished, about 11 o'clock, the place was secured, all the lights were turned off, all the power was off, and everybody went home. And at about 1:45, a neighbour, happened to be the mother of one of the usherettes at the theatre, she noticed what she thought was a bit of flickering of paper in the toilets at the back of the cinema. She took no notice, but when she got up about a little while later, she thought, my goodness, this is flame, I better get something done.
There was bad weather that night. The Empire Cinema caught fire. It supposedly started in the boiler room, which was at the end of the cinema below the screen, spread forward to the front of the Empire, which was in Sutton Road. The fire services did turn up to try and contain it.
And during fighting the fire, Fred Mace, one of the volunteer firemen, was at the top of a 40-foot ladder on a very windy night, and although people were asked to support it, there wasn't enough human strength to keep it aloft when a gust of wind took it and it fell to the floor.
Sadly, in February 1939, after the last showing, the cinema burnt down, taking with it the life of one brave firefighter, a volunteer called Fred Mace. Fred Mace lost his life in the attempt to put it out. That building has never been replaced. It remains as a car park to this day. The Empire Theatre was built to the highest standards, but you can imagine a cinema that's capable of taking 500 people in a town with a population of 6,000 by that time was not going to break even, so it struggled.
Clark Gable as Rhett Butler.
I'm saying very plainly that the Yankees are better equipped than we. They've got factories, shipyards, coal mines, and a fleet to bottle up our harbors and starve us to death. All we've got is cotton and slaves and arrogance.
Vivian Lee.
No longer was there a piano tinkling in the front. There was the full sound. So by the outbreak of the Second World War, the cinema had been completely transformed. Oscar Deutsch was the developer of the Odeon chain of cinemas, had come along, and he had opened cinemas in Worthing, in Lancing and various other places along the south coast, and wanted to develop one in Seaford. But Charles Bravery was having none of it. He wanted the cinema in his own ownership rather than this incomer. So he struck a deal with Oscar Deutsch. And on the site which we now see occupied by Morrison's, he built an 850-seat cinema called the Ritz. It was a multi-purpose building. It had a dance floor on the first floor, and a restaurant. It had a parade of shops along both sides in Dane Road and in Pelham Road. It was a magnificent building.
And I can remember queuing up with this, this quite long queue of children, all getting wildly excited and going into this, what seemed to me a vast building, and it had huge, great colourful posters advertising the adult films. And looking back, I think they would have all been hand painted. They weren't photographs, and they were painted in quite garish colours, which were really exciting if you're a kid in the 1950s, when the world is pretty much black and white. So we go into the cinema. Jeremy must have got our tickets. I can't remember whether they were the pink 1 and 6s or the green 2 and 6s. And then we go down the stairs, and from light you'll suddenly go into dark, which is a little bit scary for a 4-year-old. There are weird shadows everywhere. And then an usherette comes up with a light and guides us to our seats. I can remember the show starting with cartoons, which then there would be a short cowboy film and then a much longer one.
But I stood outside the cinema, and you could only go in with an adult. And my mother and aunts were busy. So I remember standing outside, and you could ask an adult, "Could you take me in? I want to see this film." So that was very interesting, but the whole part of it was the excitement of going. And the music before the film started, they used to play The Whistler and His Dog and The Poor People of Paris. And sometimes at the Ritz, something would go wrong with the recording because they didn't have an organ there. So you'd get The Poor People of Paris played through about 3 or 4 times.
Well, I guess there's going to be trouble down here. We better head back to the ship.
Now, that's not a bad idea.
You mean so that you can spend the rest of our vacation shopping on Fifth Avenue, huh?
Perhaps I'm not the outdoor type after all. Sometimes I wonder why you ever married me.
And what about my wife? What have you done with her?
What have you done with Farrago? Did you save his life?
The stars, the Hollywood stars, were really attractive, and so cinema was flourishing. New Haven had its Rex Cinema, which before that was the Cinema Deluxe.
So I sort of sat down and did what I was told and didn't say anything. But then at the interval, the lights came up and I was able to look around me and see this rather wondrous place. I mean, the curtains would be drawn across and they were all ruched and flouncy as if they were made of chiffon.
Just before the Second World War, my uncle, my father's brother, George Bartlett, he was a projectionist at the Ritz. How long for, I don't know, unfortunately. But yes, that was definitely his main job. Wow. Probably 7 days a week.
Well, there were several doors into the cinema on the front, and there was, I think, 1 or 2 little steps. And I know a lot of the time when the wind was blowing, the doors used to be rattled, or some of them were absolutely, you couldn't go through only certain doors. So you went into this foyer, and it was like a magic palace. On the floor, it was all Art Deco, beautiful sort of, I think there were marble floors, and with lovely little insets and lovely little, everything was colour. And then there was the central light, which was really nice, on your left of the box office.
I can remember the cream building, the red doors, the posters each side of the doors, the queues, people waiting to get in. And behind the doors, it always looked very black and quite foreboding for a little one, I think. My mother took me to see Bambi. It was a big foyer, and Doris with her torch leading us to our seats. Yeah, ice creams were served in the interval. And we used to queue up outside. The queue used to go right the way around the building, down by the shops of the Ritz. We used to play round the back of the cinema, and on a bomb site, lots of rubble. And I used to play with a friend there, making adventures. And she dared me one day. She said, "Bet you dare not go up that ladder, the one that goes up the side of the Ritz cinema at the back." That was enough for me to go up there, and I did, and climbed up. And of course she followed over the top of the parapet wall onto the flat roof, and we did that several times. Mother never knew. Made a camp up there, played up there for hours at a time because no one could see us, so we had a good time up there. And until one day when we were playing and suddenly a policeman's helmet appeared over the top of the parapet wall at the top of the ladder, and that was it. We were stopped. He climbed over, told us off. We were really in trouble, and I remember him asking me, "Where do you live?" And cheekily I said, "In a house," and got a clip round the ear for that.
On Saturday afternoon, Seaford Children's Theatre used to go and rehearse. And there was one particular incident when there was quite a very quiet film downstairs, and the lady that was in charge of the theatre, a very, very tall lady, came upstairs and said we were tap dancing, singing, "Happy feet, I've got those happy feet, bang, 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 bang. Will you stop this? There is a film going on this afternoon in the cinema, and all we can hear is this tap dancing." That was it. We had to be quiet after that. So very often our tap routines were done when there was an interval between films.
1960, when I would have been about 14, and I started going to the cinema more. I would go with my girlfriends, but we would, of course, would have our eye on meeting boys. And the boys very rarely seemed to pay for a ticket because they would come in through the back door from the gents, and they would gradually make their way up to the 3 and 6s. Now, we would have bought 1 and 6penny tickets at the front, and we would just, when the usherette wasn't looking, we'd move ourselves into the 2 and 6s. And then if we liked the look of the boys, who by this time had migrated to the balcony and the 3 and 6s, then we would give them the eye, they would give us the eye, and then hands would come down over the balcony and haul us up over the top. And then we would wait to see who would buy us, at the interval, a Kia Ora and an ice cream.
Oh, the whirring from the projector all the time, a continual whir. And if you looked up, you could see the smoke from people smoking through the beams of light of the projector onto the screen. Thick, thick smoke. Everybody smoked then. And there were the ashtrays between the back of each seat, brass ashtrays. They'd always be overflowing.
Now there was quite a formidable lady in the box office some of the time. There were various staff, and if she liked you, of course, you got some of the better seats, although we, I'm afraid, only went into the stalls.
Thing called Ghost. I had no idea what it looked like, what it felt like, what I should expect if I saw it. This ghost was always in all our minds, and I can remember being absolutely terrified. In fact, I ran screaming from the cinema one morning.
In Dane Road there were a row of shops. There was one which was a china shop and sold lots of ornaments. And the picture shows me in the pushchair, my mother bending over looking in the shop window with her mother and her father, right in the foreground.
But in the interval, one of the usherettes used to come along. She'd walk down one aisle, across the front, and stand to the right of the screen, and the spotlight would come on her. And if you were lucky, you got an ice cream. And then she'd go out. But latterly, towards the end of the cinema, the usherette used to go very fast down one aisle, across the front, wait there for about 2 minutes, rush out, and everybody was going like this. I want an ice cream. And then when you came out, she'd say, I didn't sell many today.
I've lived in Seaford on and off since the late 60s when I got married. I actually lived here then for a couple of years, and it was quite a thriving place. By the time we moved there, it was probably it's gone through its heyday. Films that I remember the most, on my husband's request, we went to see Emmanuel, which was incredibly boring. And it was about the first time that women's breasts were shown, and sort of lots of men doing, so good. There was also comedy sex films with it. Very much a flea pit by the time we started going there.
Yes, my husband remembers going there, would have been about the late 60s, early 70s, being so damp in the Ritz, and the roof leaked, and he took an umbrella because the water poured in if it was raining.
I think into the 60s, particularly, it began to fade away, to the point where by 1970, the Ritz was a really faded glory. A town like Seaford did not have the population to support a thriving cinema of that size and cost. And so when it closed first of all in 1970, it had never been redecorated. Part of the letter R fell off, and so the Ritz became the Pits. It had a couple of resuscitations before it finally closed in 1985. Once, this used to be the Ritz Cinema. Now it's a thriving supermarket.
But the whole aura of that cinema being there, that centre of entertainment that everybody liked, went.
Well, we have been able to rescue some items. We have an original lamp here from the Ritz and some signs up there. The projector, I doubt very much if the projector from the Empire survived the fire. So I suspect, although I don't know for sure, that this came from the Ritz.
What we have got is a cinema which operates more like a club than anything. I get a huge buzz from it. In essence, we are our name. We are a community cinema.
Geraldine and I came to Seaford in 2016 and were delighted to find thriving cinema. But it has become more enriched because you can go to a multiplex cinema where you can feel the sound all around you and sit in comfortable armchair seats. Or you can go to the Seaford Community Cinema, which is much more intimate but still a communal shared experience.
With carefulness and courtesy beside you, this is all you'll ever need to guide you. Once upon a time, in the